Dr. Kelly Thomas was a powerful doctor who worked for a big medicine company called Pharmanova. They made a special drug called Monix. It was supposed to help pregnant mothers stop feeling sick. But something terrible happened. Instead of healthy babies, mothers started giving birth to children with big heads, bent spines, and the sound of cracking skulls instead of crying babies. Farmanova hid the truth, burning papers, lying to the world. But African mothers, they would not stay quiet. They rose up, shouting, "This is evil! Will justice come for these innocent babies?" This is a true heartbreaking story of greed and the brave mothers who fought back. On the neon-lit corridor of Lagoon General Hospital, Peter Mark, a 32-year-old mechanic, is seen pacing it with an arm positioned as twisted steel cables. The boots on his foot show the trying years of his work and the times of relentlessly kicking tires. The air of the corridor he paced was filled with noxious antiseptic. That was even the least of his concerns. Across the corridor was a delivery room where Peter's wife, Fatima, righted on the bed in a sweat-drenched wrapper, clinging to her swollen belly. Her braids, which used to be styled in elegant bone designs, can be seen stuffed out of her scarf in damp tendrils. "The pain is about to end," Peter said as he comforted his 28-year-old wife with a very tight grip. She concurred by gripping his hand back, even though her nails hurt. Peter was excused afterwards as Fatima was moved into the theater and dosed from the antiseptic. She was going to undergo a cesarean section. After some time, a sound that was long anticipated was heard. The sharp and lively cry of a baby filled the room with so much relief for the mother and father. But the room froze at the sight of the baby that was delivered. The steady hands of the doctor who delivered the baby could be seen visibly trembling, and his once soft face stiffened out of shock. The nurses only exchanged glances to avoid making their patients so uncomfortable. Peter was called in immediately, and the doctor calmly explained, "Mr. Mark, there were complications." The word complication made Peter's heart drop like a wrench in an empty drum. As soon as Fatima got back to consciousness, she could sense that things were not all right, which made her search the room with her weak eyes to make sure that it did not have to do with her baby. "Hush," she saw him, the baby. It looked like a perfect little creature, with 10 tiny fingers and toes. But something was obviously off with his head. His skull was grotesquely larger, and his scalp stretched like a soap bubble ready to burst. His face, dwarfed by the mass of the skull, looked almost swallowed by it. "Macrocephaly," the doctor muttered as he saw the disappointment in Fatima's face. "You have seen quite some cases lately," he added in what seemed to be an assured tone. Fatima's eyes popped out as if they were out of their sockets. A sound escaped from her mouth. Not a scream, not a wail, but something raw, guttural, and the kind of noise a soul makes when it's breaking. At almost the same time, Peter's knee dropped. He was caught on the edge of the bed as his fingers dug painfully into the mattress. There were lots of questions. Why? How? What went wrong in the process? Amidst the wailing, the doctor tried his best to explain in a much simpler way. The skull did not fuse properly because of excess amniotic fluid accumulation. This will result in excessive pressure on the brain. He ended his little speech immediately and abruptly. "We need to run some tests now to see the extent of the brain damage," he said, motioning the nurses to move the baby. "Will you leave?" Peter interrupted with a cracked voice. "We will do everything we can," the doctor assured, avoiding the question. Fatima asked with shaky hands to touch her son before he was moved for the test, and he was placed in her embrace. She gasped at the weight of her baby's head when she held him to herself. She juggles between cradling him and whispering prayers while her tears drip on her fragile skin. Peter stood staring at his son with a heavy heart. That was supposed to be light. All he could see was the abnormally sized head of the baby pressing against his wife's chest. Although the exteriors of the hospital were blasted with car and motorcycle horns, generator hums, and shouts from hawkers, the room where Fatima delivered was so quiet that it seemed time stood still. One moment thought Peter, who has been a mechanic all his life, that some things cannot just be fixed. This situation is one of them. The slums of the city have a new story to tell. The big-headed babies were on everyone's lips. Affected mothers in Abule now swaddle their newborn babies in extra layers of vibrant, floral Ankara wraps so as not to draw unnecessary attention. Even at that, some women could be seen whispering gossip and pointing fingers stained with henna designs, looking for babies that don't look normal. At a cluttered cyber cafe near a popular college road, the air was filled with fried plantains and roasted peanuts, and Amanda Bailo could be seen scrolling through her phone as she munched on the street snacks she bought some moments ago. As a 29-year-old journalist, surfing the web was more than a hobby for her. It was a means of getting good leads in the newsroom. Right on her screen, a viral video of a baby with an enormous skull convulsing in a rural clinic is playing in a loop. The swollen head of the baby gave a splitting crack at every move, caused by the seizure. The video ended with the mother calling out Monique's for killing her baby. Amanda searched her memory, as she was certain Monique's sounded familiar. She snapped her fingers when she recalled. Monique's is the famous Pharma Nova's miraculous prenatal vitamin that is handed out like candies in public hospitals. Drop the goddamn story, Amanda, our editor yelled as he stormed through the office. Mr. Fetos, notorious for his tight suits, slammed his fist on his desk to demonstrate his fury. He pointed at one of the framed pictures in his office and posed for his shot while shaking hands with the CEO of Pharma Nova. You want to shut us down? Pharma Nova owns half of our ad space. For heaven's sake, and you probably know that, he said, rattling. And how many babies does Pharma Nova own? She asked without a blink. Festus replied much meaner. I didn't remember assigning you to activism stories. You are only allowed to write about celebrity gossip. Amanda left his office with the faces of the grieving mothers in her mind. She had seen these women clutch their babies like broken dolls, with faces filled with agonies no Ankara could cover. That night, in her tiny, manageable apartment on the outskirts of town, she got busy and could hack into one of Pharma Nova's servers. Nobody knew that she was tech-savvy, because it was not on her profile. But that ability has helped her gain access to lots of insider information, which is helpful in her work. As she searched through the thousands of documents on the server, the glow from her laptop revealed the picture of her grandmother and her favorite artist, Fela Kuti, sitting comfortably in the corner of her desk. Using specific keywords, her search was narrowed down to the relevant document she was looking for. Some of the files loaded slowly, but it was worth the wait. There it was, a report document on Monique's. She opened it and scanned it for observed side effects of the drug. Side effect complications classified. Amanda's suspicions were true. There is no way Pharma Nova doesn't know. The classified documents contain reports and analysis dating back some years explaining what has happened to these babies. They fucking knew. Amanda cursed under her breath. A day after Amanda's story went live, someone who claimed he had more information on Monique's secretly reached out and asked to meet. Dr. Ibrahim arranged a meeting with Amanda the following day in one of the less classy restaurants off George Avenue. We recorded 18 cases in just last month alone. The neurologist began in a low tone filled with sympathy. All the mothers took Monique's at least once in their first trimester, he added. And why is this information not publicly on record? Amanda asked. I I tried filing a report to the Ministry of Health, but I was threatened with losing my license. I am sure it is the same for everyone who tried reporting," he muttered. Amanda was already on her phone, reviewing the files she saw in Pharma Nova's archives. Everything Dr. Ibrahim said checked out with the proof she was holding. One of the problems on the ground is Pharma Nova's influence. They have lawyers, politicians, and law enforcement to back them up. This is how I can help," Dr. Ibrahim said, sliding a USB drive across to Amanda. "It is a file containing patient's ultrasound results, before and after," he added, as the USB landed safely in Amanda's pocket. Days after Amanda met with Dr. Ibrahim, her phone buzzed at almost midnight. The call was from an unknown contact. "Stop sniffing around. Your last warning." Amanda smirked as the call went off after the caller dropped this message. It was way too late. She went straight to the already prepared blog post, The Unsilenced, and cross-checked the files, scans, and other evidence attached to the blog. The viral video of the mother accusing Monix of her mishap was also there. The headline read, "How Pharmanova Poisoned a Generation. Evidence Attached." She has everything in place to make Pharmanova's disaster of a trial go public. She clicked on send, and that was it. John Mark died on a Tuesday, after 1 month of his birth. It wasn't a dramatic kind like in a collapse, but in a slow, suffocating horror that Peter and Fatima would see replaying in their nightmares for the rest of their life. John's skull grew and grew heavier than his tiny neck could support. Fatima cradled his head like a fragile melon whenever she lifted him. Although the doctors at Lagoon General conducted the first surgery to drain the fluid, the cerebrospinal fluid never ceased following due to unknown complications. But that fateful morning, John's breathing was visibly shallow, while his eyes had an unusual, dull, glassy sheen. Although Fatima was humming a popular Hausa lullaby for him, his whimpers were too weak to be noticed. Peter became more worried and asked Fatima to return to the hospital. Unfortunately, the traffic had other plans for them. Their battered Corolla crawled through the city's usual chaos. Gridlocked public transport, hawkers rushing to vehicles, and the relentless honking of impatient drivers. John's whimpers had turned to wet goggles, which terrified Fatima. "Peter, drive!" Fatima was screaming with a raw, hopeless voice. Peter could see that she was clutching John as tears dropped on his pulsating skull. Then Peter's head was sounding like a soft pop. John's skull had stretched beyond its limit and had split along the suture lines. Fatima's scream was fierce. "No, no way." But the baby has finally lost the fight. When they finally got to the hospital, John was pronounced dead, which was caused by an acute intracranial rupture. In other words, John's skull was growing thinner. More cerebrospinal fluid was produced, and his skull could not contain it. The pressure became so much that his skull cracked. It was because she took Monix, wasn't it? Peter demanded as the videos he saw online came to mind. The doctor hesitated to answer, but he had no choice. He explained that Pharmanova's branded vitamins had forced his body to produce more CSF than it should and made his skull bone thinner. The Monix tablets Fatima received at her antenatal clinic had an imprint of smiling nurses holding pamphlets that read, "Wake up confident each morning. No warning, no contradictions." After John's remains were buried, all Peter could do was sit under the glow of their lantern, reminiscing on the plans he made for his son before his birth. He looked at the inked bracelet John was given after his birth, and it was all smushed, just like the lies Pharmanova had fed them. His deceased son's file has been lying on the table close to the lantern, where it was dropped after he died. That night, Peter decided to look at it and discovered that the doctor had slipped a name into the file. Dr. James Aproko, senior researcher, Pharmanova, West Africa. Looks like I have something that needs digging, he muttered while heading to bed. Peter is no detective or a mechanic who follows the trails of frayed tires and oil leaks to fix a vehicle. He will do the same with his quest for truth. Follow the trails. He retrieved the packet of the Monix tablets his wife received and searched for the producers. He also googled Monix and their licensing details came up. Developed by Pharmanova R&D. Lead clinical reviewer J. Aproko. The name was the same that was dropped in his son's file. Peter needed to see their medical doctor whose name kept coming up. To find him, he started with the hospital close to him, Lagoon General Hospital. When he arrived, he went straight to one of the nurses who delivered John. He was also on duty. We got 3 big-headed babies this week alone, and it's no longer funny. She replied to Peter's complaints in a low tone. Peter pressed her further, and she nervously decided to help. Talk to Dr. Adu, who is in charge of records. He may have something for you. But be careful, she whispered before heading up to a word. Peter knew that Aproko was the most important person in his investigation, and he knew the person who would help him with just that. Bright. Bright is a lanky, loud-mouthed guy who runs a cyber cafe near his workshop and knows his onions. Peter met him and narrated his ordeal. Over some bottles of beer, Bright pulled up Pharmanova's employee directory from a hacked back-end portal. Bright motioned for Peter to come and look at what he saw on the screen. Dr. James Aproko was their golden boy until last month, when he resigned. Peter chuckled. Funny timing, huh? But his last login shows that dude is still in town. Bright said with a smile. And his bank account is still active around here. He smirked. Man is just hiding, but not gone. Peter knows his boy is very much around and still in the country. He just needs to locate him, and that is when his workshop comes into play. Drivers, hustlers, and market women traded secrets between oil changes. His shop is one of their hubs. Peter had a customer, a taxi driver who was on contract to drive Pharmanova's staff, and it was the guy who could get him the address. On the driver's next fitting, Peter slipped a generous discount for changing his brake pads so he could open up to him. Aproko's brother owns a pharmacy down the town, the driver said. Man has been buying enough palm wine to drown a village lately. He added reluctantly. These 2 sentences were all he needed to find Aproko. He only needs to stalk him. The apartment Peter followed Dr. Aproko to was weathered but not poor for people who had once had money. As Peter climbed the stairs leading to Aproko's room, his heart pounded like a faulty piston. In Dr. James Aproko's dimly lit apartment, the smell of fermented palm wine and regret filled the room. Empty bottles of dry gin littered his glass center table, their contents long gone, just like his conscience. The harsh, loud knock on the door shattered the silence. James staggered to the door to see whom he later knew as Peter Mark, standing with bloodshot eyes, caused by weeks of grief. In his trembling hands was a sheet of paper containing the medical assertion of his son's cause of death. When Peter sat down, he dropped the paper in front of him and said, "They told me his skull burst because it was too thin to hold the never-ending flow of fluid to his head." Aproko's body went cold immediately. Over the past few months, he has received personal reports like that from doctors. Peter hissed loudly and asked, "He worked on Monix. Why?" The question weakened Dr. Aproko's nerves. Was there ever a reason? Was there a better answer? He had asked himself these questions all these years, but finally concluded that it was only business for Pharmanova. The guilt-stricken pharmacologist looked up and answered, "I work on Monix and other pharmaceutical projects because I wanted to help change." When I saw that things were going wrong with Monique's first trial results, I informed them of the need to shut it down, but I was threatened. Kelly said that Africa isn't Europe, and nobody checks the data around here, he added. He moved to one of his drawers, pulled out a dusty-looking USB drive, and handed it over to Peter before he left. When Peter returned to his one-room apartment, he plugged the USB into his old laptop, which was barely working. The screen flickered to life, casting airy blue shadows on the room's peeling walls. Fatima was soundly sleeping on the other side. The documents he saw were unsettling. It contained a screenshot of the email Kelly Thomas, the CEO of Pharmanova, sent to Dr. James. Buried the result of that rat experiment. The board wants proof of high return on investment, not ethics. The file also contained evidence of altered clinical trial data and proof that cases of babies with head deformities were deleted from reports. It also included a signed memo approving Monique's rollout in the country, which was boldly tagged as low regulatory oversight with high profit margins. His son's face flashed in his mind. Peter remembered the big head of his son, his fragile skull, the way his tiny fingers had curled around Fatima's thumb just hours before he died. It was the memory of how Monique killed his son. There are 5 stages to grief, and Fatima was just in the phase of acceptance and revenge. She stood on a rickety wooden platform one fateful morning with her navy blue hijab to openly seek justice. Justice for John Mark. Justice for all women who lost their baby to Monique's free trial. Justice for the babies that came to the world and died in pain. With a microphone and a little picture of John, her son, in her hands, she recruited women to march for the justice of motherhood. After moving a few blocks, she looked around at hundreds of women, mothers in vibrant Ankara wrappers, grandmothers in faded George prints, teenage sisters holding smartphones to record history. She stood and addressed everyone loudly. When they reached the city's monument, we were poisoned. We were fed with poison. The crowd began to increase as she continued. They knew Moniques would kill our babies, but they gave it to us anyway. How evil can people be, just for the sake of money? People roared in confirmation, and other women began to give their testimony. My Clara died screaming. Mama Nikki wailed as she thrusted a photo of her daughter into the air. Then Joy, a university student informed of the march, came on her ripped jeans and a #EndMortality t-shirt, shouted in affirmation. They think we are that ignorant. They think we won't fight back. By noon, the protest had slipped from the slums waterways onto the mainland streets, and a river of furious women would be seen cutting through the city's chaotic heart. Market women abandoned their stalls of ripe plantains and dried fish to join, their money belts slapping against hips wrapped in bold prints as they marched. Motorpark touts stood silent, while some redirected traffic to clear the marchers' path. Amanda Bello was jogging alongside the crowd as she live-streamed the march to 500,000 viewers. This is what corporate genocide looks like, she shouted into her phone. Behind her, a handmade sign bobbed above the sea of heads, which read in red paint, Pharmanova equals baby killers. The Pharmanova Tower stood like a dagger in the heart of the city's business district, its mirrored windows reflecting the approaching sea of mothers in unorganized fragments. The security guards exchanged nervous glances as the protest grew louder. One adjusted his earpiece with trembling fingers to report the situation on the ground, while the other surreptitiously cursed himself. Inside the elevator heading to the 15th floor, Kelly Thomas's reflection stared back at her. Her bob was still perfect, and her designer blazer was impeccably tailored. However, the elevator music clashed violently with the live protest footage on her iPhone 15 Pro. Her assistant, Timothy, was waiting unnervingly at the elevator door to open. "The commissioner isn't coming," he said quietly when Kelly stepped out. "What do you mean by he's not?" She was interrupted as Timothy handed her his tablet, which showed the commissioner's wife in live coverage of the ongoing protest. Her voice echoed in Kelly's office. "Farmanova must pay." Timothy further zoomed in on a framed picture of a beautiful toddler with a tragically big head she was holding. They lost their daughter 3 weeks ago after it was delivered in Lagoon Hospital. Kelly Thomas felt she was drowning for the first time in her ruthless career. Down on the street, the crowd has already gained momentum. Fatima Mark still marched at the front lines with other mothers in a heartbreaking display of unity. Mama Nikki is still in her stained apron, holding up vials of the Monix vitamins she had saved when she was pregnant. Even Dr. Aproko had emerged from hiding, protesting unnoticed among the crowd heading to the Farmanova Tower. Now the gates to the tower were under pressure as hundreds of protesters pushed against them in unison. At the second push, the gate flung open and people trooped into the compound. An elderly woman marching with the crowd threw the stone she had been holding, and immediately Farmanova's lobby window shattered. The sound seemed to have permitted people to throw, as the air became full of flying objects some moments later. People were throwing anything that came in handy. Baby bottles filled with contaminated water from Farmanova's poorly regulated factories. Dozens of tiny shoes, Farmanova's brochures, etc. Amidst the chaos, Amanda Bello climbed onto an abandoned police truck parked inside Farmanova's compound, and her live stream hit 2 million views. "Take a look at these guys," she screamed into her phone, panning to show a Farmanova executive trying to flee out a back exit but was blocked by motorcycle and taxi drivers who had formed a human chain. Her camera also caught a young mother hugging her surviving twin, whose head was already showing the telltale swelling, and an elderly man holding a sign with Farmanova's stock price circled in red. "Is this what our babies are worth?" Kelly's MacBook would be heard in the executive suite, pinging incessant emergency alerts. Channels breaking. Farmanova shares plummet 60%. Arise TV. WHO calls for the national recall of Monix. NTA. Law Enforcement Agency raids Farmanova facilities. Kelly's phone rang, and the board of chairman's name flashed on screen. She couldn't contain the incoming calls, so she quickly left them on voicemail. From her office, she could see that the crowd finally breached the lobby, and she watched as her security made way for the marchers. Timothy quietly approached Kelly and placed his staff ID on the desk. "Your sister's baby is currently at Lagoon General, right?" he said, his voice thick. "And the baby was big-headed," he added before walking out. That moment, she realized that no amount of money could clean the blood off her hands. Some revolutions don't need guns. It's simply mothers who have lost their babies, and a world that is ready to listen. As they started launching into the main offices, a Farmanova PR officer in a body-hugging suit tried to hand them a statement denying them access to the building. Fatima, who was on the front line of the movement, snatched the paper away from him and tore it into pieces. More people joined the crowd with drums, and new sounds emerged. It sounded like the pounding rhythm of the talking drums, the same ones that had called villages to war for centuries. An elderly woman beat the hide skin with her gnarled hands, while her voice rose in an unfamiliar war chant. The mothers took up the cry, "We will not swallow the death of our children." Meanwhile, far away in London, New York, Johannesburg, people watched in shock as African mothers did what regulators wouldn't. They weren't just breaking windows and doors, they were breaking the system. Amanda Bello was also standing at the front lines, a camera still live streaming the march to the world. Pharmanova's glass doors reflected the mob. Security guards shifted nervously to each floor of the building to make way because their batons were useless weapons for this kind of fight. As the chaos got hotter, Kelly Thomas, Pharmanova's CEO, sneaked out through the back exit. But her tailored blazer and usually perfect bond gave her presence away. Amanda sprinted on sighting her. "Kelly," she shouted, shoving the microphone forward. "What do you say to the mothers whose babies you killed?" Kelly's icy brown eyes flickered, and her head lowered. Not with guilt, but fear. The world is now watching as Pharmanova's empire of lies supposedly collapses. Dr. James Aproko adjusted his tie as he stood in the elevator, unsure what to say in his meeting with Kelly Thomas. At 32, he still had the hopeful eyes of the scholarship boy who had aced his way out of the city's cramped flats. The elevator made a stop, and he headed for the meeting room. The door slid open to reveal Kelly Thomas's chrome-plated office, all sharp angles and cold surfaces. At 45, she was all calculated, elegant Brazilian hair flowing over a beautiful wrap dress that cost more than James' monthly salary. Her French-tipped fingers tapped impatiently on an iPad, showing Pharmanova's rising stock price. "You are 5 minutes late," she said without looking up. James Aproko slid the results folder across her desk. He sighed without any compliment. The Monique's trials are a disaster. 70% of fetal mice developed head deformities, and their skulls exploded in the third trimester. James, she chuckled, leaning forward to the report. "We will believe rodents over real African mothers. This continent loses billions to morning sickness, absenteeism." She added, "Be a patriot," she said, and moved to the window. "Moniques will keep women working, grow our GDP. Those mice," she waved dismissively, "they were probably sacrifices for the progress." James' stomach churned. He was in a tight spot. He had never been in a position to make a life-threatening decision quickly. "Are you saying that I should bury this report? Do you know what that means?" His fingers trembled as Kelly handed the folder back to him. Kelly smiled and tapped the iPad, and immediately James' phone buzzed. It was a credit notification from his bank. The amount he saw sent shivers down his spine. That was his 10-year salary altogether. "That was for your corporation," Kelly said lightly. "And a promotion as head of African trials," she said. While they were still talking, a printer in the building spat out falsified reports. With the credit alert, James knew he was already caged, so his voice was hollow when he finally asked, "What needs to be changed in the report?" Kelly smiled confidently. "Now that's my staff pharmacologist speaking." As James returned to the elevator, everything in the building caught his attention, as though they were watching him. The cleaner in a frayed overall was scrubbing the Pharmanova logo while Timothy, then a junior assistant, pretending not to have overheard their conversation, arranged Kelly's lunch of jollof rice, chicken, and imported champagne. His phone buzzed and his wife's message came up. "Your colleagues are saying you need to deposit $5,000 standby for Mama's future dialysis or she will be discharged." As the elevator descended, a message said the bills had been cleared. That night, James deleted the mouse study from his hard drive, but the reminders of Tiny's calls, hopping like bubble wrap, never haunt him in his dreams. Years later, as the protest raged outside Pharmanova, James would realize that no amount of money could wash away the sound of bursting skulls that sent innocent babies to their premature graves. Amanda's live stream went viral. Hashtags like "Big Head Babies" and "Monique's Mothers" began trending on other social media platforms like Twitter and TikTok. Protesters grew from hundreds to thousands. and all roads lead to Pharmanova's HQ. From a safe location, Kelly ordered his PR team to release a written statement blaming the cause of their uproar on the traditional herbs they took. She also asked that the activists streaming the march be sued for defamation. The trial was not a success, as Pharmanova's lawyers were able to weaponize bureaucracy. Where is your casual proof? The sneered at almost every testifier who came to the stand. James also testified, but Kelly's legal team produced expert reports on African genetic deficiencies that can be present in similar cases. The judge presiding over the case has already been bribed with a residential villa in Dubai, which led to the dismissal of the case after all was said and done. Months later, Kelly was awarded the Business Leader of the Year, and her speech at the event evoked memories of the saga that had happened before. Far away from the elite gathering of the wealthy, Peter and Amanda, who later met at the protest, converted his garage into a clinic for affected children with the help they received from online sympathizers. From a corner, a toddler, Kiki, could be seen giggling as Peter adjusted her custom-made neck brace. She would never walk, the doctor said while smiling and warning at the same time. But she gets to survive. Peter chipped in. It was all that mattered. Want more wisdom? If you enjoyed the story, I am sharing an exclusive life-changing story, a free ebook, never released before. Drop insert in the comments and it's yours. Shh. Love the story? There is more. Want secrets? Big lessons? Money tricks? Just click next. Let Africa's magic guide you. Your upgrade? One click away. Psst. Want our free ebook? Type insert below.